Siraxa stood at the High Council's chamber, the cold marble floor reflecting her unwavering presence. The chamber was vast, surrounded by towering stone walls etched with the history of the Zalari Empire. The Zalari people, a proud and fierce race, had long held dominion over the stars, their power unmatched in battle. Yet here she was, facing the very same council she had served for decades, her fate hanging in the balance. Her dark, angular eyes, usually filled with the fire of a warrior, now burned with defiance. The punishment she was about to receive didn't make sense. How had things come to this? General Siraxa, once a celebrated hero in the Empire, had made a choice that no one had expected. She had defied a direct order from the High Commander himself during an interplanetary conflict. Instead of attacking the human colony, as she was instructed, Siraxa had chosen to retreat. She argued that the mission was a futile slaughter, that the lives lost would serve no purpose but to create unnecessary enemies. But the Council had not seen it that way. The High Counselor, a tall figure with deep-set eyes and a voice that echoed through the chamber, stood from his seat, his gaze fixed on Siraxa. The other members, their faces obscured by ceremonial masks, remained silent. General Siraxa, the High Counselor began, his voice deep and commanding, "Your actions have endangered the integrity of the Zalari Empire. You have shown weakness, and you have dishonored your rank." Siraxa's posture remained stiff, her jaw set as she stared back at him, her gaze unflinching. She had heard the accusations before. What they saw as weakness, she saw as compassion. They never understood. But this was different. She had hoped for a simple reprimand, perhaps a reassignment to a less critical post. Instead, the Council's judgment would come swiftly, and it would be harsh. "You are hereby sentenced," the High Counselor continued, "to a form of punishment unlike any other you have faced. You will marry a human." The words hung in the air like a heavy stone. The shock that rippled through Siraxa's body was like a wave crashing against her. She had fought in countless battles, but this was unlike any wound she had ever endured. Marry a human. The very idea was absurd. Humans were weak, primitive, and unworthy of any Zalari's time, let alone their loyalty. "You will go to Earth and be wed to a human male, a civilian," the High Counselor added, his voice cold and devoid of any empathy. "You will learn humility, and you will return with the knowledge of the human race. Your mission will be to strengthen the bond between our two worlds. If you succeed, your sentence will be reduced. If you fail, you will remain on Earth as an exile." Siraxa felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her. Marriage? To a human? She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The idea of submitting to such a fate, of tying herself to a race she had long considered beneath her, was incomprehensible. She had trained her entire life to command armies, to lead her people into battle. She had faced alien beasts, treacherous alliances, and countless dangers. But this was an entirely different kind of trial. The Council members exchanged glances, their stoic faces betraying no emotion. This was not a decision for them. It was a punishment, pure and simple. To them, it was a logical solution. She had defied their authority, and now she would be forced to submit to an unimaginable fate. The irony was not lost on them. Siraxa's mind raced, her thoughts a blur. How could she marry someone she had never met, someone from a race she barely understood? And yet, what choice did she have? She could not challenge the Council's decision. Their word was law. The High Council's judgment was final, and any resistance would only lead to greater consequences. She could feel the heat of the room pressing in on her as she swallowed her pride. Despite everything, she could not afford to show weakness in front of them. "When am I to leave?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "Tomorrow," the High Counselor replied, his voice sharp. "Your transport to Earth will depart at first light." A man stood waiting for her at the edge of the field. He was tall, his posture straight but not imposing. There was nothing particularly extraordinary about him at first glance, except for the warmth in his eyes, a kind of kindness she had not expected from a human. His clothes were simple, nothing like the grandeur of Zilari armor. He wore faded jeans and a loose shirt, and the dirt on his boots spoke of hard work. Saraxa immediately felt a pang of discomfort. A human, this man, Daniel Reed, was her punishment. He was to be her husband, an arrangement made by the very people she had once served with such pride. "Welcome to Earth, General Saraxa," Daniel said with a slight smile, his voice calm and friendly, but carrying a warmth she wasn't used to. "I'm Daniel Reed. It's an honor to meet you, though I'm sure this isn't how you imagined your mission would go." Saraxa didn't respond immediately. She only studied him, her gaze sharp and calculating. His words were polite, but she could see the uncertainty in his posture. He wasn't sure what to make of her either. She was an alien warrior, a towering figure of power and authority, and here he stood, a simple human, unarmed and untrained in the ways of war. "I assume you're ready for whatever comes next," Daniel continued, his hands slightly raised in a gesture of openness, as if trying to ease her into the situation. "I'm not sure what they expect from us, but we'll figure it out together." Together. The word felt foreign to Saraxa. There had never been a together in her life. She had always been alone, always had her soldiers, her mission, her honor. Now she was to be married, bound to a human with no regard for her history or rank. She nodded, her voice cold and formal. "Lead the way." Daniel seemed a bit taken aback by her response, but he quickly recovered. "Of course," he said, his tone not offended but patient, as if he were used to dealing with people who didn't show warmth easily. They walked together, the silence between them stretched but not awkward. The field around them was peaceful, the grass swaying in the gentle breeze. It was a far cry from the harsh landscapes of Zilari, where the winds were bitter and the ground barren. The peace of earth was unsettling to her, too peaceful, too calm. They reached a modest house at the edge of the field, surrounded by a few small structures and an overgrown garden. The house itself was nothing like the grand buildings of the Zilari Empire. It was humble, built with wood and stone with a warm, earthy color to it. It was simple, yet inviting. "This is home," Daniel said, gesturing toward the door. "I know it's not much, but it's all I've got. Make yourself comfortable." Saraxa hesitated before stepping inside. The interior was cozy with rustic wooden furniture and soft natural lighting. There was a fire burning in the hearth, the smell of cooking food filling the air. She had not expected any of this. The simplicity, the warmth, everything about this human's life was a sharp contrast to the sterile, calculated environment she had known. Daniel led her to a chair near the fire and offered her a drink. She took it reluctantly, unsure of what to do. She had never been treated this way. Never had a human offered her comfort or hospitality without some hidden agenda. This was not how she had imagined her punishment. He wasn't trying to control her or intimidate her. Instead, he was simply offering her what seemed like a small kindness. "You must be tired," Daniel said, breaking the silence again. "It's been a long journey. I'll prepare some food. It's not much, but it should be enough." Saraxa watched him move around the kitchen, his actions unhurried, as if this was all just a normal day. She found herself oddly unsettled by his calm demeanor. He was so ordinary, so unlike the warriors she had known in her life. And yet, there was something about him that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, uncertain. Why? Saraxa found herself asking, the word slipping out before she could stop it. "Why are you so kind?" Daniel looked up from the stove, his expression soft. "I suppose it's just who I am," he said, shrugging. "I know this situation isn't easy for you, and I can't imagine what it's like to be forced into something like this, but I want to make it as bearable as I can. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not going to treat you like an enemy. I don't want to." Saraxa stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't what she expected from a human. It wasn't what she expected from anyone. But as much as she wanted to dismiss him, to write him off as weak and unworthy, there was something about his words, something about his honesty, that made her pause. This would be more difficult than she had imagined. The days on Earth passed slowly for Siraxa, and yet, with each one, the strangeness of her situation became harder to ignore. Every morning she awoke in a modest room with walls made of wood and windows that let in the soft sunlight. The sounds outside were unfamiliar, full of birds chirping and the rustling of leaves. It was so different from the harsh hum of machines and the distant cold air of her homeworld. One afternoon, after a quiet meal with Daniel, Siraxa found herself drawn to the garden behind his house. It was an unremarkable space, filled with rows of plants and flowers she didn't recognize. There was no grand design, no military precision, just wild, unorganized growth. Yet the sight of it filled Siraxa with an odd sense of peace. She stood by the fence, her dark eyes studying the plants as she tried to make sense of them. The plants were different from the cultivated, genetically engineered crops of her people. These were natural, wild. They had no purpose other than to exist, to grow, to bloom. It was a concept that confused Siraxa. She had never seen anything grow without purpose before. On her world, everything had a reason. Every plant, every animal, every action. It was how the Zilari had survived for centuries. Order was everything. "Do you like the garden?" Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to find him standing nearby, a watering can in hand, smiling gently at her. "I don't understand it," she admitted, her voice low. "These plants, they grow without purpose, without control." Daniel chuckled softly, setting the watering can down. "They do have a purpose," he said, stepping closer to her. "They're here to bring beauty, to nourish the earth. Some are for food, some are just to make the place feel alive. But it's not about control, it's about letting them be. It's about balance, you know." Siraxa furrowed her brow, her gaze, following his hands as he knelt down to tend to one of the plants. She wasn't used to hearing such thoughts. Ideas of balance and freedom were foreign to her. In her world, balance was achieved through power, through dominance over nature, over enemies, over everything. Control was the key to survival. It had always been that way. "Balance?" she repeated, trying to understand. "I don't understand how something without order can be balanced." Daniel paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about control. It's about understanding. Things can be chaotic, unpredictable, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. Sometimes the best things come from letting go of control. You can't make everything fit into a perfect box, and that's okay." Siraxa couldn't help but feel a shift inside her. It was as though something in her, something buried deep, was starting to stir. She had been raised to believe that life was about precision and dominance, and yet here was a human with his simple ideas telling her that maybe life could be about something else, something softer. "But you still control the garden," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. "You decide what grows here. You pull the weeds, you plant the seeds, you control what stays and what goes." Daniel smiled. "True," he said, "but even in that I try to listen to the plants. I watch how they grow. Some plants need more water, others need more sunlight. You can't force them to grow the way you want. They need time and care. You have to be patient." Siraxa stood silently, her mind racing. She had never thought about things like this. On her world, there was no room for patience, there was no room for listening to nature. They had conquered their environment, bending it to their will. Everything was designed to serve a purpose, everything had to be useful, efficient. But here, in this garden, it felt as though everything was allowed to simply be. And that thought was unsettling. "Would you like to help me with the garden?" Daniel asked, breaking her thoughts. "I could show you how to take care of the plants. It might help you get used to Earth a little more." Siraxa hesitated. It felt strange. Strange to be so close to a human. Strange to engage in something so simple as gardening. Yet she felt a curiosity that she couldn't ignore. Her life had been so rigid, so focused on war and strategy. This was different. Maybe there was something to be learned here. suppose I could try, she said finally, her voice cautious but open. Daniel smiled. Great. Let's start with these tomatoes. They're almost ready to be picked. They spent the next few hours working together in the garden. Daniel showed her how to gently pull away the weeds, how to check for ripe vegetables, and how to care for the delicate leaves. Siraxa was surprised by how much patience the task required. It was unlike anything she had done before, and at first, she struggled with the slow pace of it. She was used to quick decisions, rapid action, but as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, she found herself becoming more and more absorbed in the task. The simplicity of it, the quiet connection with the earth, felt strangely comforting. By the time they finished, the garden looked tidier, more cared for. Siraxa wiped her hands on her trousers, looking down at the rows of plants. She felt something. It wasn't a sense of victory or conquest, but something else, something softer. You know, Daniel said, I think the plants like you. Siraxa raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was joking or serious. The plants like me? Yeah, he said with a grin. They respond to how you treat them. You were gentle with them, patient. You might not think it, but I think you've got a bit of gardener in you, Siraxa chuckled quietly. It felt odd, this lightness, this unexpected humor. For the first time since her arrival on Earth, she felt a sense of connection. Not to the mission, but to something else, to this place, to this man. The days on Earth continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Siraxa had begun to settle into her new life with Daniel, though every moment still felt out of place. The soft rhythm of daily tasks, tending to the garden, preparing meals, and learning about human customs was alien to her. Yet, there was a strange comfort in the routine. The longer she stayed, the more she found herself questioning everything she had once known about strength, power, and purpose. Earth was nothing like the cold, calculated life she had lived among her people. One afternoon, as Siraxa and Daniel were working in the garden, a loud knock on the door echoed through the quiet farm. Siraxa stood up straight, her instincts kicking in. She was trained to be alert, to always be aware of potential threats. Daniel, on the other hand, simply shrugged and made his way to the door. Stay here, he said lightly, sensing her unease. I'll see who it is. Siraxa nodded but remained where she stood, her gaze fixed on the door. Her body was tense, ready for anything. She wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable. On her world, threats were met with strength, with weapons. Drawn. Here on Earth, she was not a warrior. She was just a guest, a prisoner even. Daniel opened the door to reveal a tall man in a dark uniform. His face was stern, his eyes cold and calculating. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who held power, much like the council members back on Zalari. Siraxa instinctively stiffened at the sight of him. This is my home and I don't recognize you, Daniel said, his voice firm but not unfriendly. What's your business here? The man ignored Daniel's words and instead turned his gaze directly to Siraxa, who had risen to her feet, watching the exchange with cautious interest. The man's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something familiar. Siraxa had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who saw her not as a person, but as an object, a tool for their own purposes. General Siraxa, the man said, his voice low and commanding. I have come on behalf of the Zalari Empire. Your actions have not gone unnoticed. Siraxa's stomach tightened. The mention of her people, her former people, sent a ripple of tension through her. She had expected this moment. She knew that eventually the Zalari would come, for her. But the reality of it was different from what she had imagined. She hadn't expected it to feel so intrusive, so personal. This is my home now, Siraxa replied, her voice steady but not without a hint of challenge. I don't answer to the Empire anymore. The man's gaze hardened at her words, but he didn't flinch. You may think you have escaped their grasp, but the Council has not forgotten you. They sent me to remind you of your duty. Daniel stepped forward, his expression growing more serious. She doesn't belong to you anymore. You're not welcome here. Siraxa placed a hand on Daniel's arm, stopping him from saying more. This was not a situation that could be solved with words. She knew that better than anyone. The Zalari were not kind to those who defied them. But there was something about the man in front of her, something in his cold, calculating gaze, that unsettled her. She could sense that he was here not just to deliver a message but to force her back. I do not serve the Empire, Siraxa said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction. I do not return to their control. The man raised an eyebrow. You think you can simply walk away from the Empire, from your duty? You were chosen for this punishment, General. You will come back with me, whether you like it or not. Siraxa felt her heart race, her hands tightening into fists. But then a strange thing happened. As she looked at the man standing before her with his rigid posture and unyielding authority, she felt nothing. There was no fear, no anger, just a deep, abiding calm. She had expected to feel rage, or perhaps regret. But all she felt was a quiet certainty. I will not return, she repeated, her voice unwavering. My duty is no longer to you, or to anyone from Zalari. The man's eyes narrowed, but instead of moving to force her back, he simply gave a slight nod. So, be it. The council will not be pleased. He turned to leave, his footsteps heavy on the ground as he walked away without another word. Siraxa watched him go, her mind racing. She had justified her past again, but this time it felt different. This time she hadn't felt the need to fight. She hadn't needed to prove anything. She had simply stated the truth. Daniel stood beside her, his face full of concern. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Siraxa turned to him, her expression softening. I am fine, she said, her voice gentler than usual. I didn't expect it to be like this. I know, Daniel replied, his tone filled with sympathy. But they can't force you to do anything you don't want to do. You don't owe them anything. For a moment, Siraxa just stared at him, her thoughts swirling. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being able to face any challenge with determination and power. But what if strength wasn't just about fighting? What if, in this quiet life on Earth, she was learning something else? Something she had never considered before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, Siraxa admitted, her voice small, almost uncertain. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. You don't have to figure it all out right now. We'll figure it out together. Siraxa glanced at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had come to Earth expecting only punishment, only the heavy hand of the Zalari Empire. But in this moment she realized that maybe, just maybe, this human, this simple man was offering her something more valuable than she had ever known. The chance to choose her own path. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the fields behind Daniel's house. Siraxa sat on the porch, her back straight, her eyes scanning the horizon. It had been several days since the visitor from the Zalari Empire had come. Since then, life had returned to its strange calmness, but the reminder of her past, the Empire, her duty, her mission, still lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that her past would always follow her, that one day the weight of it would catch up with her. But for now she had learned to enjoy the simplicity of this new life, working in the garden, helping Daniel with small tasks around the house, and most of all, being present. But today had been different. Daniel had asked her to help him repair the solar panels at the edge of the property. It was a task that seemed simple enough, but one that had unexpectedly taken a turn. As Siraxa climbed the ladder to inspect the panels, a sharp gust of wind sent it swaying slightly. She steadied herself quickly, but in doing so her foot slipped on the last rung. In an instant the ladder was tipped and Siraxa was falling, her body twisting mid-air. She tried to brace herself, but the impact was still too much. She landed, hard on the ground, her body slamming against the earth with a painful crunch. The air was knocked from her lungs, and for a moment everything was silent. Siraxa, Daniel's voice called out in panic, cutting through the quiet. Siraxa's vision blurred for a moment, but she forced herself to focus. She could hear him rushing toward her, but her body felt heavy, like it wasn't quite hers anymore. She tried to move, to sit up, but the sharp pain in her side stopped her. "Don't move," Daniel ordered, his voice tense with worry. "Stay still. You've been hurt." She attempted to speak, to tell him she was fine, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she gritted her teeth and nodded, not wanting to alarm him further. She could feel the warmth of the earth beneath her, but the throbbing pain in her ribs and back made it difficult to focus on anything else. Daniel crouched beside her, his hands trembling as he carefully checked her wounds. "You're bleeding," he said softly. "I need to get you inside. Let's get you somewhere comfortable." Siraxa winced as Daniel helped her sit up slowly. His hands were gentle, unhurried. She could see the concern in his eyes, and for the first time she realized just how much he cared. It was the simplest act, really. A human, someone she had thought would be incapable of understanding her, was trying to help her in a way no one ever had before. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice strained. I didn't think this would happen." "You don't have to apologize," he said quickly, helping her to her feet. "Accidents happen. Let's just get you inside, okay?" He helped her walk, supporting most of her weight as they made their way to the house. Siraxa was used to pain. She had endured wounds in battle, faced fierce creatures, and survived harsh environments. But this felt different. This wasn't the pain of a warrior. It was the pain of someone who had let their guard down. She had always prided herself on being invincible, on never needing anyone. But here, with Daniel, it felt like she was finally allowing herself to be vulnerable. Once, inside, Daniel gently helped her onto the couch, his hands carefully adjusting her position to ensure she was comfortable. She didn't argue. Her body ached too much to move, and it was easier to let him take care of things for once. "Let me clean your wounds," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. Siraxa looked up at him, her gaze softened by the tenderness in his actions. She had never been treated like this before, treated as if her pain mattered to someone else. She had always been the one giving orders, the one in control. But here, in Daniel's small house, she was allowed to let go, even if just for a moment. He returned with a first aid kit, his movements calm and deliberate. He carefully wiped away the dirt from her skin, his touch gentle as he applied a soothing ointment to the cuts. Siraxa winced, but she didn't pull away. "You know," Daniel said, his voice a little shaky as he continued to tend to her, "I've never had to take care of someone like this. I'm not used to being the one helping. But I think I'm starting to understand why it matters." Siraxa raised an eyebrow, confused. "Why what matters?" He paused for a moment, looking into her eyes with an honesty that made her heart skip a beat. Caring for someone, looking after them, making sure they're okay. It's not about power or control. It's about being there for them, even when they don't ask for it. Siraxa remained silent as Daniel continued to work, each word slowly sinking into her. She had never understood these human concepts. For her, strength had always been about self-reliance, about never needing anyone. But what if he was right? What if there was more to strength than just standing alone? Daniel finished wrapping her ribs, making sure everything was secure before gently placing a pillow behind her back. He stepped back, looking at her with a mixture of concern and care. "You'll need to rest. You've been through a lot today." Siraxa nodded, feeling strangely at peace despite the pain. "I will rest," she said softly, though the words didn't feel as heavy as they once might have. As Daniel turned to leave the room, she stopped him with a soft voice. "Thank you, Daniel." He turned back with a smile, the warmth in his eyes comforting her. "Anytime, Siraxa, anytime." And for the first time since her arrival on Earth, Siraxa allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face the world alone. The days that followed were filled with a sense of quiet tension. Siraxa's body was healing well enough, but the soreness in her ribs reminded her of how fragile she was becoming. She had never been one to need help, never been one to rely on anyone. But here, in this strange place, with Daniel's soft smiles and gentle care, it was difficult to ignore the reality. She wasn't the invincible warrior she had once been. She had never imagined that Earth, of all places, would be where she'd feel vulnerable. It wasn't a lesson she wanted to learn, but as the days stretched into weeks, it became harder to dismiss. Daniel's presence had a way of making her forget about her mission, about the Zalari Empire, about the sentence hanging over her head. He had shown her another way of living, a gentler way, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Today, however, the reality of her situation came rushing back. The doorbell rang, and Daniel went to answer it, leaving Saraxa alone with her thoughts. She could hear muffled voices as Daniel spoke with the visitor outside. Something about the tone of their conversation set Saraxa's nerves on edge, and she stood, moving toward the window. She could see a tall figure in the distance, someone she didn't recognize standing with Daniel. They were talking in low voices, but Saraxa could tell by the rigid posture of the stranger that this wasn't a friendly visit. She didn't wait to hear more. She knew the visitor could only be one thing, another representative of the Zalari Empire. They had come for her. Without a word, Saraxa turned away from the window and walked toward the door, her mind already racing. She had prepared herself for this moment, but now that it was here, she found herself unsure of what to do. What if they forced her back? What if they didn't let her stay? Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. She wasn't ready to leave, not yet. By the time she reached the door, Daniel was already standing in the entryway, his face tense and drawn. The stranger, a tall woman with sharp features and the unmistakable air of authority, stood on the porch. Her uniform was sleek and dark, matching the color of the Zalari military. "Saraxa," the woman said, her voice cool but not unkind. "The council has sent me. It's time to return." Saraxa felt a wave of frustration surge through her. She stood tall, her posture unwavering. "I've already told them," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not returning to Zalari. My duty to them is over." The woman's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "Your duty to the Empire does not end with a single act of defiance," she said, stepping forward. "You were chosen to be a symbol of unity between our people and the humans. You have a responsibility." Saraxa's heart raced as she processed the words. The council had sent this woman to remind her of her responsibility, but Saraxa wasn't sure she could return to that life, to that identity. She wasn't the warrior they had created. She wasn't the general who had fought in endless battles. She was someone else now, a woman who had discovered a different kind of strength, a strength she hadn't known existed. "I'm not their tool," Saraxa said, her voice a little sharper than she intended. "I'm not anyone's tool anymore." The woman's expression hardened, but she didn't press. "The council will not be pleased," she said. "You will be branded a traitor, and the consequences will be severe. You'll never be welcome among your own people again." Daniel standing behind. Saraxa spoke for the first time, his voice filled with quiet determination. "She doesn't need to go back. She doesn't belong there anymore. She's made her choice." The woman looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And you, human?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "You think you can protect her from the Empire? You think your words can stop what is coming?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to protect her from anything," he said firmly. "I'm just saying that she's not alone anymore. She doesn't have to face this alone." Saraxa turned to face him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. His words were simple, but they meant everything to her. For the first time since her arrival on Earth, she realized that maybe she didn't have to make this decision alone. Maybe there was more to her life here than just a punishment. Maybe, just maybe, she had a future here. She turned back to the woman on the porch, her gaze steady. "I've made my choice," Saraxa said again, her voice unwavering. "I choose this life. I choose to stay." The woman's eyes flashed with something between disappointment and anger, but she said nothing more. With a sharp nod, she turned and began to walk away, her footsteps heavy on the porch. "You may think you have a choice now," she called, over her shoulder. "But the council will not forget you." As the woman disappeared down the path, Saraxa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The weight in her chest, the one that had been pressing down on her for days, seemed to ease just a little. She had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. Daniel stepped closer to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice full of concern. Saraxa didn't answer at first. She simply looked out toward the horizon, the sun beginning to dip below the distant hills. It was a quiet, peaceful sight, one she had come to appreciate in a way she never had before. "I'm more than okay," she said softly, finally meeting his gaze. "I'm exactly where I need to be." And for the first time, Saraxa felt the weight of her past life truly fall away. She had chosen this path not because it was easy, but because it was hers. The future was unknown, but for the first time she was ready to face it. The days after the visitor left were quieter than ever, but Saraxa's mind was far from calm. The decision she had made was not an easy one, and it weighed heavily on her. She had chosen to stay on Earth, to live a life that was foreign to her, to embrace something new. But the fear of what that choice might mean lingered in the back of her mind. Her past, the Zalari Empire, was not something that could be erased easily. She knew that the council would never forget her defiance. They would see her as a traitor, someone who had betrayed everything she was trained to be. The consequences would come. She couldn't escape that. But in the quiet moments, when the sun set over the fields and the stars began to fill the sky, Saraxa found peace in her new life. Daniel's presence was a constant reminder that there was more to life than duty and power. There was kindness, there was love, and there was something infinitely more valuable than anything she had ever known: a sense of belonging. One evening, as they worked together in the garden, Saraxa paused to look at him. Daniel was bent over, carefully pruning the vines, his movements unhurried and calm. He had a way of being present in every moment, a quality that had eluded her for so long. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice hesitant. The question felt strange to her, as if she was asking for something she didn't fully understand herself. But it was a question that had been on her mind for days. Daniel glanced up from his work, wiping his hands, on his pants. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone soft and open. "Do you ever think about the future?" Saraxa pressed. "About what happens after all of this is over?" Daniel stood up straight and took a deep breath, looking out over the garden. His eyes softened as he thought about her question. "I think about it a lot," he admitted, his voice steady. "But not in the way you might think. I don't think about it as some far-off thing that's going to come and change everything. I think about it in terms of today, of right now. Because the future? It's shaped by the choices we make today." Saraxa looked at him, her mind processing his words. It was a simple idea, but one that carried more weight than she had expected. She had always believed that the future was something that had to be controlled, that every choice had to be made with the end goal in mind. But what if it wasn't about the end? What if it was about living in the present, embracing the choices as they came? "The future isn't something we have to control," she murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. "It's something we experience, something that happens in its own time." Daniel smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "Exactly," he said. "The future is just a series of moments, Saraxa, and right now, this moment, this time we have here together. That's what matters." Saraxa's heart stirred at his words, and she felt a shift within her, like a weight lifting off her shoulders. For so long, she had carried the burden of the future, the fear of the unknown, of what might come. But now, standing here, in this quiet space with Daniel, she realized that she didn't need to carry that weight anymore. She could choose to live in the present, to embrace the life she had here. As the evening light began to fade, Siraxa stood beside Daniel, their hands brushing lightly as they worked together. It was a simple, peaceful moment, but it was one that filled her with a sense of contentment she had never known before. Later that night, after dinner, Daniel invited her to sit on the porch with him. The stars were just beginning to appear, twinkling softly in the night sky. Siraxa sat beside him, her legs stretched out in front of her, her mind calm. "I think I understand now," she said quietly, her voice soft but sure. "Understand what?" Daniel asked, his gaze fixed on the stars. "Why I'm here," Siraxa replied, her eyes looking up at the same stars. "It's not just about my punishment. It's not about what the Empire wants or what I've been trained to do. It's about living, about finding something I never knew I needed, a chance to choose my own path." Daniel turned to her, his expression warm and full of understanding. "You've made your choice, Siraxa," he said gently. "And I'm glad you did. You're not alone here. You never have to be." Siraxa felt a rush of emotion fill her chest, something she had never allowed herself to feel before. It was vulnerability, yes, but it was also something else. Something beautiful. It was trust. She had learned through her time with Daniel that she didn't have to be the warrior all the time. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She could choose to live for herself, to find peace in the present moment, and to share her life with someone who cared about her. For the first time in her life, Siraxa felt free. She turned to Daniel, meeting his gaze with a softness that surprised her. "I never thought I could feel this way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But with you, I feel like I can breathe again." Daniel smiled, his hand reaching out to take hers. "You can, Siraxa. You always could. You just needed to let yourself." As the night wore on, they sat in silence, the stars above them shining brightly. Siraxa realized that she had come to Earth expecting to face punishment, but she had found something far more valuable: freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever she wanted, but the freedom to be herself, to choose her path, and to build something meaningful with someone who saw her for who she truly was. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Siraxa was ready to face it. And she would do so not as a soldier, but as a woman who had found something worth fighting for, a bond beyond duty, beyond the expectations of the Empire.